Think of all the mad Scottish football moments, Jock Stein's quadruple Rangers bottling European finals, whatever it is Hearts are doing right now. None of them were as insane as the tale we've got for you today. This is the literally unbelievable story of Gretna and their rise from the obscurity of the English non-league to the top of the Scottish game. Before we start, I've got to recommend Anton Hodge's In Black and White. Not only the best Gretna book ever written, but potentially one of the more informative books on British football ever penned.
FA Cup hasn't happened for over a century. They're currently top of the Northern League, which they won last season by 20 points. No mugs. Gretna, home to 4th Division Rochdale. Barry Davis witnessed this little bit of soccer history.
The school teacher, butcher, joiner, postman and fruit machine engineer are all here looking to enjoy the big day. And only the player manager, Mike McCartney, once of 1st Division Southampton, has league experience.
There's been 3 football clubs to come from Gretna. The first went bust in the 1920s, the second was formed in 1946. This is the one we're here to talk about today, which gives some indication as to what happened to them. We'll talk about the third one much later on. Champions of the Carlisle and District League 20 out of 34 seasons, Gretna FC finally wangled their way into the Northern League upon its expansion in 1982. Within a decade they had won it not just once but twice in successive seasons too. They even got themselves into the FA Cup, making the first round proper twice, first in a replay defeat to Rochdale in 1991, then away to Bolton 2 years later. The real ambition though was to play in the Scottish League, partly out of necessity as travel was chipping away at club finances by the end of the millennium, partly out of opportunity. The SPL had expanded to 12 teams. They were rejected twice in a row. Money had got so tight the club had shown themselves of their entire management and acquired Rowan Alexander in November 2000. He'd become pivotal. Not that it felt that way immediately. 16th place in the Northern Premier League was achieved in the 2000-2001 season, followed up by a minor improvement to the top 7 the subsequent season. Then the door opened. Further north, Morton FC were going under. They proved to be the decoy though, surviving as Airdronians were liquidated. It left the Scottish League to seek a final member, with each club to put forward their bid on June 18th, 2002. Gretna won by 13 votes to Phoenix Club Airdrie's 8 in the opening ballot, before Gretna sauntered to 16 votes in the second ballot. For the first time in 55 years, Scottish football would be played in Gretna.
Defensive errors by Morton gave Gretna the goal on a plate. Matt Henney had to provide the finish though, and he did it in some style. Congratulations all round, and the cheers would have been heard at the various weddings going on.
Raydale had been completed by the manager himself, whose £100 weekly wage contributed to 1/8 of the club's budget. Rowan Alexander cut the grass, painted and decorated to spruce up the ground in time for Morton's visit. One thing he didn't quite cover was the corner flag, still embroidered by the Unibond League logo. They scored within 18 seconds in what turned out to be a 1-1 draw. A keen observer that day would be a certain Brooks Milson, another figure of pivotal stature in the Gretna story. He'd pledged an initial 20 grand to cover the club's Skill Seekers programme, part of which was spent on a flat to house youth players, which Alexander relied upon due to their financial situation. Then he wiped the club's debts of 50 grand out instantly. Gretna's first away game in the Challenge Cup was a novelty in so many ways. A Scottish Cup game held at Hampden, given their opponents were Queen's Park, and played at the cavernous stadium. It wouldn't be the last time we mention a Hampden Cup game in this video. Black and Whites would go out instantly in that Challenge Cup and match that feat in the League Cup, losing at home to East Fife before bowing out by the same scoreline in the Scottish Cup third round against Clyde. Ultimately, it could be classed as a successful season. 11 won, 12 drawn, 13 lost, the epitome of mid-table in 6th place. That season, Brooks Milson became more than just a philanthropist at Gretna. By June, he was the majority shareholder, and so began the road to his chairmanship at Raydale. You knew he had more power by the fact that they almost signed Dean Holdsworth. In the end, they settled for the equivalent of your mum getting a choc ice out of the freezer when she has the ice cream van pull up. Yes, that's right, David Holdsworth was signed. The sky was apparently the limit. Martin Cameron of second-tier St Mirren and top-flight midfielder Danny Lennon were the headline grabs before a raid on Carlisle, and former Carlisle players saw the likes of Lee Madison, Mark Birch and Ian Stevens hop over the border. Much promise appeared to flounder at the first hurdle as Gretna got spanked 5-0 by Inverness Cally Thistle in the Challenge Cup. Still, the ambition remained, with assistant manager Derek Fry openly alluding to Gretna being presented the title on the final day of the season, where they would face Queen's Park at Hampden. He was sacked on October the 8th as Rowan Alexander reshaped his coaching staff. Oopsie poopsie. Didn't do the club any harm as they dropped just 2 points in the next 7 games and also progressed in the Scottish Cup beyond Dumbarton. Sadly though, that cup run would come to an end at the hands of Clyde again in the 3rd round. You have to say it was an improvement as Gretna got to within 9 points of promotion behind Stranraer and Stirling Albion, this of course in the days before the playoffs. However, Gretna's position belied the bombast heard from the hierarchy and some of the coaches. Perhaps if Martin Cameron's 17-goal haul wasn't curtailed thanks to an injury in March, they might have crept over the line, but one thing was for sure, Gretna had momentum and they had to go up the following season. For a club in the 4th tier of Scottish football, the accounts necessitated it. Milson had almost pledged £1 million of his own cash, with the squad's wage bill now ticking over at £500,000 annually. Plans for a new stadium at Raydale were ignited too, and this would be a story that would rumble on as Gretna continued to ply their trade in Scottish football. And they typically went big in the market, most notably of which for the prolific frontman Kenny Doiker, who had a propensity to bag against the anvils. The club even promised they'd spring for a winter break in La Manga if Gretna were top of the table by Christmas. Safe to say they were, after just dropping just 5 points away at Queen's Park and Peterhead in the 18 games prior to 2005. They'd post the same record in the second half of the season, winning their final 14 fixtures to post a quite frankly ludicrous 98 points from 36 games, featuring an almost Scottish record 130 goals and a staggering 47-point deficit to 3rd place Cowden Beef. Doiker had bagged himself 38 goals from 30 games, double the people now flocking to Raydale, and any momentum they previously had was now turbocharged. And if that was enough sunlight for the club, they even got drawn a home tie against Dundee United in the 3rd round of the Scottish Cup.
Gretna were finding the going tough as United's Mark Wilson put away. Kenny Duker got Gretna back into the game, and it looked as if they'd got a second through Gavin Skelton. And Mark Birch did the business from the spot. Shattered when recent signing Stevie Crawford ran onto a long ball to lob Matheson and restore United's 2-goal lead with his first goal for the club. It went against them. Gretna can claim the goal of the night as Skelton hit home from around 30 yards. So United...
In the twice postponed fixture, Gretna may well have lost, but they shot their first real message across the bowels of Scottish football that they meant business. If you count at home, the amount of money, and I'll use the legal term, pumped into the club by Brooks Milson was now £2.7 million. Because of annual losses, that now stood at close to £2 million worth of debt. The SFL placed a cap on Gretna's signings. No players over the age of 21 could be acquired until they got their house in order. So they moved David Holdsworth into a youth coaching position, inflated the academy to under-11s through to under-19s age groups as Milson continued to fritter money away like some kind of Batman into other clubs in need. In what was the first season of promotion and relegation playoffs in Scottish football, Gretna would have a safety net of 4th place to try and cobble together a spot in the 1st Division. They didn't need it. It took until Christmas Eve and the visit of Forfar Athletic for Gretna to taste a loss in the division, dropping only 6 points from 3 draws in their opening 17 games. With the Challenge Cup and League Cup pissed away at the first hurdle as usual, January would mark the real business of the Scottish Cup. After defeating non-league opponents in rounds 1 and 2, a trip up to Perth to slay St Johnstone was the task. Steve Tosh duly obliged, scoring the only goal against the First Division outfit, his former club. Clyde were no obstacle this time, as they had been in recent Scottish Cup seasons, as James Grady's hat-trick settled the replay at Raydale on Valentine's Day. Suddenly Gretna found themselves in the quarter-final of the Cup and the field had opened up greatly. Celtic had gone out in the 3rd round to Clyde of all teams, Rangers only made it to the 4th round. Suddenly there was an air of, why not? With the league practically wrapped up, nearly 3,000 crammed into Raydale to see Kenny Doiker net the only goal of the game in the second half. St Mirren were gone, Gretna were going to Hampden but for a cup game and not just some training exercise against Queen's Park. A week beforehand they received the almighty boost of sneaking past the challenge of Alloa Athletic in a subpar performance. News from elsewhere was more positive. Morton had been thrashed 4-0, therefore Gretna had gone up as champions.
Ball gets played through, that's a mistake, there's a chance here for Kenny Chuka, he's going to take it wide. Kenny Chuka, Bobby Mann turns it away, but Gretna have scored!
He never made a challenge, and the referee, I'm afraid, has been conned. It looks like from that angle, Bobby Mann.
He wants to go to the Scottish Cup final. Keely's got to make the save here, but he doesn't. Brilliant. Sets the ball back to the other substitute. Experience McCoken. Low drive in the touch on goal. Gretna en route to the Scottish Cup final.
On April Fool's Day of all days, the news was that Gretna were to play in a Scottish Cup final. Fortunate to win a penalty and lucky with the own goal, Gretna would be at Hampden again in 5 weeks' time. In the meantime, the Black and White's job was to keep things ticking over in the league, which they did, winning 4 and losing 2 of their remaining games, posting an unassailable and still ludicrous 88 points with 97 goals. Minds were on Hampden, and the other semi-final, a 4-0 Hearts win over their rivals Hibs, had offered up another wrinkle. Due to Hearts' second place finish in the SPL, they had netted themselves a place in the Champions League qualification. This qualified Gretna for Europe before a ball was even kicked. And this fairy tale seemingly knew no bounds.
Trying the long throw tactic, and it's a good one. Breaks it to Scudetto! Rooney's down, and suddenly Gretna have a lifeline. Can Gretna get back in this? Saved! McGuffey scores! First penalty in the shootout. Presley scores. Last year with Dundee United. Grady scores. Time here. Coolly done. The Englishman scores. And once again, Townsley saved. Craig Gordon saves for Hearts. Responsibility falls on the shoulders of Gavin Skelton. Skelton hits the bar and it's over! Hearts have won the Scottish Cup final!
Of all players who missed spot kicks for Gretna, it should not have been Derek Townsley and Gavin Skelton. The former had been at Gretna back in the 90s and had rejoined the club in 2004. The latter had been at the club since signing from Workington in 2001.
Were dealt a cruel blow after just 12 minutes when Ryan McCuffey brought the home support to their feet with this well-taken goal. Dictated the pace, however, and it wasn't long before they hit back with a deserved equaliser. Darren Kelly's towering header kept the level at the break. Derry turned on the style in the second, but there was better to come from Derry just 2 minutes later. Derry were in dreamland thanks to this wonder goal. Gretna heads dropped, but Derry showed little mercy, and Kieran Martin capitalised on some loose defending to extend their lead to 3 wide for the visitors, and they capped it with yet another effort from the top drawer. Martin again the finisher, his second of the night, making it 5-1 on the night, and a place.
So much for a fairy tale in Europe. Gretna didn't even make it out of the British Isles as they were slapped by Derry City in UEFA Cup qualifying. It had turned out to be the least of their problems. Accounts had shown another £2 million loss, totalling Gretna debts at over £5 million to the chairman, who, ominously, had set a deadline of April 2008 for repayment. The facade was busy crumbling as work on finding a new stadium, which needed to be properly ironed out by March 31st, 2007 if they were to use it in the SPL, trundled along at a slow pace. If, and still a big if, despite Gretna's form, they were promoted, geography dictated that Gretna's home games will be played at Fir Park. Just grabbing the atlas, that's just over an hour's drive away. The brief allure of Europe with the potential to play in a top division gave Gretna that added gravitas in the transfer market, so in came winger Brendan McGill from Carlisle, centre-half Craig Barr from Blackburn, and the experienced Aberdeen midfielder Neil McFarlane ahead of the new season. They'd had worse starts to a campaign. Hamilton Academical were thoroughly rinsed 6-0 on the opening day, and whilst Hibs had Gretna's number in both cup competitions worth fighting for, the Black and Whites pushed through what was their first sticky league period in a while throughout September and October. Naturally, they came out of it the other side, a pristine November leading into a near-perfect end to the glorious year known as 2006, with only Airdrie able to take any points off them. Battling towards the top of the division, all was not well behind the scenes. Key youth figures in David Holdsworth and Viv Busby were being made redundant, salaries were being trimmed not by Occam's razor but with Occam's nuclear-powered fucking hedge trimmer. The beginning of December saw Kenny Doiker request a transfer as both Steve Tosh and James Grady, enormous servants to the club, were told they were free to leave as Gretna sat 11 clear at the top, entering 2007 in a world of hurt. Ultimately, Doiker was able to leave on loan to Northampton Town whilst Gretna stuck to signing youth players, Stephen Hogg representing the more timid approach in January this time. The club couldn't even afford to keep on the press officer or maintain the matchday radio station any longer. Form buckled as Gretna's lead was chipped away at the top of the division. Alan Main was sacked by the manager for a dressing room altercation with coach Mick Wadsworth in March, and Rowan Alexander himself was placed on sick leave under mysterious circumstances. The club was eating itself rapidly. The next game though saw a minor repair. Caretaker Davy Irons moved the team back into a 4-4-2. They scraped a 1-0 win at Dens Park before going 4 unbeaten ahead of the visit to St Johnstone on April 7th, aka the day the league should have been won. Instead, the Perth club stole 3 points and Gretna failed to score for the third and fourth games in succession at Hamilton and at home to Clyde. It left the gap to just 1 point going into the final day. With a superior goal difference, Gretna needed to win at Ross County to go up to the top flight. Their opponents needed a result to stay up but wouldn't achieve that, Gretna eking out a 3-2 win. The flimsy fairy tale was complete. Gretna had gone from the 4th tier to the top tier of Scottish football in successive seasons. They hadn't got an LSPL ready stadium, they were millions in debt, nobody knew if they had a proper manager or not, but they had done it. Now what? Gretna would play in Motherwell, leaving March 31st, 2008 as a double deadline looming in the not too distant future now. That was when they had to convince the governing body of their plans for a new stadium and when they had to pay back their owner. They got purveyors of shite sandwiches Subway to sponsor them, they ratcheted up season tickets almost threefold and doubled matchday prices for games 75 miles away. It was a bold move, let's see if it works out.
Oh, he scored! Fabian Jantono!
Point into 3, here's McGeady, McDonald! Celtic have won it!
Here's Brown. Celtic could do with 1 or 2 of his. Subsies, that's a beautiful...
Nice wee twist, nice wee flick, nice ball in. Valinska for a hat-trick, and Valinska...
It was a house built on a foundation of that pink custard they used to feed you at primary school. On paper, the signs were enough to stir up an excitement on the borders. Ghanaian Abdul Osman, Uruguayan Fabian Jantorno, Aurelien Collan from Mallorca, and fellow Frenchman Michael Boucher from Nice. Then there was Mick Wadsworth dipping into his well-worn book of contacts for another Carlisle player in Paul Murray. There was a desperation to sign a 19-year-old from Darlington in Nathan Wright to be goalkeeper. And of course, there was the kerfuffle over the managerial post, with Rowan Alexander stirring the pot, only formally sacked towards the end of 2007. In his place, predictably, Davy Irons would become Mick Wadsworth, who graduated from his hybrid role of director of football and assistant manager. The results almost didn't matter. 1 point from their first 6, inclusive of a 4-0 battering at Ibrox, was ended by the club's first top-flight win on September 22nd against Dundee United. The respite proved brief as Gretna wouldn't win again until the Tangerines were forced to play Gretna again 3 months to the day, where they succumbed again to another 2-1 loss. On Christmas Day 2007, Gretna were cut adrift from the rest of the division, picking up only 9 points from 17 games. Promotion rivals of Christmases past, Greenock Morton dumped them out of the Cup 3-0 at home, that home being Palmerston Park in Dumfries for this replay tie. At least, plans of redeveloping Raydale were binned, with flashy ideas for an eco-stadium unveiled. To the surprise of nobody, the deadline on convincing the FA came and went without a flicker of life. Any grandiose designs on a second half of the season resurgence was culled by the sale of 14 players, and the most money the club received was the 30 grand for Danny Granger. They managed to grab Kyle Norton as a retrospective headline name in an army of loan deals to what I'll just call a bunch of lads. Gretna managed to grab their first win over Falkirk on January 19th, but even that afternoon couldn't end in peace as Fabian Jantorno's Gretna career was ended after a horrific clash with Tim Krull. Yes, that Tim Krull. 4 weeks and no wins later, Brooks Milson was put into Cumberland Infirmary with an infected brain. Now, with nobody guiding the sinking ship financially, with deadlines looming, the club went under. Staff were no longer being paid. A rearranged home game at Fir Park to begin March saw just 501 souls turn out to witness Gretna being thrashed 3-0 at quote-unquote home to Dundee United. Before a certain pandemic, this would be the lowest attendance recorded in the top flight of Scottish football. By now, any pretence of Gretna being a football club was gone. They lost most of what little points they had after HMRC chased up 350 grand they were owed, and the club filed for administration. In an attempt to save face, the SPL advanced Gretna their prize money and parachute payments to keep them stumbling on. They'd lose only one of their final 6 fixtures in the league. 27 points off Kilmarnock in 11th, Gretna would have required a miracle with or without their points deduction. All in all, Milson placed £8 million into the club. There was a bid to take over Gretna from Paul Davis, but only on the grounds of Gretna's relegation to the First Division. When the SFL proposed a demotion to the 4th tier, the club ceased to exist. For more stories about Scottish football, have a go on this playlist. We've got not only the Old Firm, but also Hearts, Hibs, Dundee, Dundee United, Aberdeen and Motherwell.